Tell me who decapitated your patient, Doctor.
All good things to those who wait.
The Silence of the Lambs was not merely another thriller, nor was it another suspense film debuting at theaters amidst a drowsy winter release slate. It was a cultural upheaval, the type of movie that reshaped an entire genre and caused people to reevaluate what exactly horror could be. Prior to Jonathan Demme's 1991 classic, horror had long been derided by Hollywood as something pulpy, gory, and below the serious notice of awards or critics. And yet along came a film that joined the refinement of a cop drama with the unflinching horror of a psychological horror show. It was not just a monster flick, it was an exploration of power, trauma, intelligence, and evil murmured through glass dividers and dark basements. And as people sat in shocked quiet before the performance of Anthony Hopkins as Hannibal Lecter and Jodie Foster as Clarice Starling, what most did not know was that off-camera, off-casting, and off-the-stage picture. The true tale was even stranger. If this kind of story touches your heart, if you're someone who cares about truth, responsibility, and speaking up for the voiceless, please like this video, subscribe to our channel Star Vault TV, and share it with someone who should hear it. Let's get started. Take Buffalo Bill, for example. To all but the most disturbed of moviegoers, he appeared a character torn from the sickest of fantasy. But in reality, Bill was not so much one invention as a quilt of America's most infamous serial killers. Writer Thomas Harris and playwright Ted Talley did not invent him out of thin air. The macabre concept of stitching human tissue into a new person was inspired by killer Ed Gein, who skinned his victims. Ted Bundy's charm and stalking methods, getting women under the guise of needing assistance with something as mundane as a couch, explicitly influenced Bill's games. And Gary Heidnik, who held women captive in a pit in his Philadelphia basement, was the model for the suburban dungeon that continues to give chills to audiences. Bill was a Frankenstein's monster of actual crime, and that is exactly why he seemed so credible, because in Broken Bits, he already lived in America. But the movie was not just about monsters, it was just as much about their hunters. Jodie Foster's Clarice Starling has become legendary, not because she bears a gun, but because she bears herself with intelligence, conviction, and quiet strength. That authenticity didn't arrive by accident. Before filming, Foster worked directly with FBI agent Patricia Kirby, one of the Bureau's first female profilers. Kirby didn't merely explain protocols. She drilled Foster on how to enter a room, weapon-ready, how to scan her environment, and even how to stand before male colleagues without apology. She refined her diction, posture, and body language until Clarice appeared and sounded just like a trainee agent. All the tiny details on screen, the way Foster doesn't breathe in elevators crowded with men who are taller than her, the way she tenses when she's questioned by authority figures, are a result of that thorough coaching. To viewers, Clarice wasn't only a character. She was a mirror of the actual women struggling to be heard in the FBI at that moment in history. For Foster, the part was personal in ways audiences couldn't understand. Years before, she had lived through a nightmarish ordeal with a stalker, one which left her shaken and reliant on the unspoken professionalism of lawmen. That experience had made a lasting impression of profound thankfulness, and when she entered Clarice's footsteps, she brought with her a feeling of responsibility to pay tribute to the genuine men and women who had safeguarded her. Clarice's courage in the movie, walking into harm without hesitation, is not just script, but also a direct result of Foster's own experience with actual danger and her commitment to fairly portraying law enforcement. In a way, she was paying back a debt, and that very reality shines through from each movement on screen. Such authenticity carried over into setting as well. Buffalo Bill's basement was not a movie set built up with phony props. It was shot in an actual Pennsylvania house with an actual low, oppressive basement. The ceilings were low enough to hit your head on, the air was heavy, and the camera people had to squeeze into crawl spaces to film the scenes. Lights were pushed against pipes, and actors crawled between shots to keep from bumping their heads. The notorious pit was cut out of the floor itself. That suffocating fear was not just a filmmaking illusion. It was the tangible reality of the actors and production crew laboring in an area that was more of a tomb than a studio. When people gasp for air through those scenes, it's because the movie itself is gasping with them. And then, naturally, there was the single most frightening aspect of all, Anthony Hopkins as Hannibal Lecter. His work has been deconstructed, analyzed, and referenced ad infinitum, but what is less commonly discussed is how much it really unsettled Jodie Foster in real life. In their first big scene together, the famous quid pro quo exchange, Hopkins adopted a delivery style so cold, so quiet, so mesmerizingly still that Foster subsequently confessed to being actually frightened of him. She kept clear of him between shots, not out of anger, but because there was something about his presence that felt unsafe at a visceral level. Dem observed, and instead of attempting to ease past the tension, he allowed that tension to simmer silently, recognizing it would seep naturally into performances. What the audience perceived as tension on screen between Clarice and Lecter was also tension off screen between two actors, one shying instinctively from the other's unsettling energy. Even more remarkable is the fact that Hopkins did all of this domination with a mere 16 minutes of on-screen time in a 2-hour movie. Less than 10% of the film is spent with Lecter, but his presence constructs the entire narrative. Hopkins realized that fear is not derived from noise or pandemonium, but from dominance. He learned about animal predators and observed that they don't blink frequently when tracking victims. He learned to maintain an unnatural stare, blinking only on critical points so that even a casual flicker of the eyes was menacing. He preferred to whisper, over yelling, sucking people closer, compelling them to bend forward when every fiber in their body screamed to them to step back. His tone was based on the clinical cool of HAL 9000 from 2001, A Space Odyssey, and the odd, sing-song rhythms of Truman Capote. The effect was a voice that was simultaneously mechanical and poetic, elegant and grotesque. Within those 16 minutes, Hopkins sculpted one of cinema's most chilling monsters. Certain of the film's most frightful moments arose from ostensibly tiny details. The cocoon that was stuck in a victim's throat, its meaning a symbol of rebirth and grotesque transformation, was not made of latex or resin, but candy. The props department melted Tootsie Rolls, mixed gummy bears, and infused gelatin to create something that was disturbingly organic-looking but safe enough to put into an actor's mouth. Actual death-as-head hawk moths were employed on set, making things difficult to shoot because the insects flew randomly into lights or off-mark, meaning endless patience was needed from the crew. Even the notorious Hannibal mask was a product of a last-minute rush. With production running behind schedule and Hopkins poised to shoot, the crew worked all night cobbling together a design based on sporting equipment and restraint devices. They etched out the mouth plate, bound it to Hopkins' face, and innocently forged an image as indelible as Jason's hockey mask or Freddy's knife hand. But for all the attention to detail on the production, none of it would have counted without the bizarre circumstances of fate bringing the project together. Originally, the rights to Harris's novel belonged to Gene Hackman, who was set to play Jack Crawford and direct. Having seen himself in the dark, grim Mississippi Burning at the Oscars, Hackman changed his mind. He didn't want to be dwelling in darkness once more and sold the rights. This allowed Jonathan Demme into the game, whose compassionate character-based approach lent the film its heart along with horror. The studios also questioned the title. The Silence of the Lambs was confusing, perhaps even ridiculous, but Hopkins and Demme were adamant that the phrase was integral, a metaphor for trauma, loss, and rescuing the innocent. Without it, they believed the heart of the story would disappear. It took all of Demme's persuasion to find Michelle Pfeiffer to play Clarice, first choice, but who pulled out, saying it was too disturbing. Meg Ryan, Laura Dern, and Geena Davis were among those considered but didn't sign on. Foster herself refused to quit. She campaigned with Demme, fought for the role, and ultimately won what she felt was hers to do. That tenacity seeps into her performance, the manner in which Clarice persists despite being belittled or ignored. Clarice wasn't given to Foster. She took it just as Clarice takes every bit of respect on screen. Even the opening date was planned for debacle. Orion Pictures released the movie into February, the graveyard month for the industry, on Valentine's Day 1991. Nobody anticipated much, but through word of mouth and the sheer strength of its performances, the film built into a behemoth. Crowds hushed over Hopkins' gaze, critics penned panting critiques, and audiences kept going back to the theater, unable to break the film's hold. What had started as a supposed throwaway turned into one of the decade's most discussed films. And then the unthinkable happened. Horror is not often an Oscar winner, and even when it does, it's only in technical categories. But The Silence of the Lambs swept the Oscars, taking Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actor, Best Actress, and Best Adapted Screenplay. The Big Five, an achievement rivaled only by It Happened One Night, and One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. It is still one of the few horror-adjacent films ever to take the top award, demonstrating that intelligence, fear, and art could coexist. The effect was instant and enduring. Resumes to the FBI, especially from women, surged following the movie, motivated by Clarice Starling's strength and composure. She didn't flaunt and wasn't superhuman. She was human, earthy, and courageous in ways that seemed possible. Meanwhile, author Thomas Harris was as elusive as his characters were fleshed out. He declined interviews, openings, or public outings, withdrawing into anonymity as his characters attained cultural icon status. Even in its darkest moments, the film found room for artistic subtlety. One of the most disturbing images, Buffalo Bill spreading his robe in a grotesque, almost ritualistic pose, secretly mirrors Leonardo da Vinci's Vitruvian Man. A killer attempting to transform himself through violence is framed in the proportions of high art, elevating horror into something twistedly elegant. Ultimately, The Silence of the Lambs' reputation is not based solely on its frights, but on its intelligence, its skill, and its ability to hold up a mirror to predator and protector alike. It was a film that happened by accident, by hurried choice, by serendipitous circumstance, and by deliberate decision. It sewed together fact and fiction in much